and hopefully we'll be able to make some progress today, regardless. And I also believe that Comfy he may not be able to make it today. I think he just moved, and so he doesn't have a computer set up yet. But we'll go over some of the updates that he has shared asynchronously and work primarily, I think, with the data working group today, discussing progress on that side. And I'm getting everybody in from the working group right now. Okay, cool. Well, we are recording. Probably just going to put out the audio of this. We'll figure out where this is posted, but likely YouTube. Couple of updates for everybody. The OMI kind of like main README, if you want to call it that, just kind of a general pointer of information, as well as the details on the technical steering committee and the technical charter. Posting a link here in the chat. You can view that and see all the details that you might have questions about. We'll probably make that a little bit more robust than a GitHub README at some point in the future when that becomes the focus for us. But for now, that is simple and it gets the job done. I've got a couple of agenda items from last time, as well as kind of an extension of the standards conversation. Although I don't see too many folks from the standards group here on today's all hands, so we may just need to follow up on that asynchronously. I know a lot of that group is on holiday. For the initial kind of agenda setting, does anybody else have any items they want to add to the agenda? And I can just kind of write those down and we can go through them one by one. Anyone from the data working group have items?
Okay. Did you want me to talk about my update now, or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So just to kind of talk about how we're planning to get the initial 100,000 images to the ML team. We aren't at the place where our full database and everything is ready soon enough, I think, for what we want for this initial 100,000 tests. So we're basically going to work around it in the sense of we're going to use some data from existing Hugging Face data sets that have okay short captions at least. And we're going to pull those down, kind of combine them into a new data set, which would be our own. We'll push that up just directly to Hugging Face as well. For our public facing thing, it will just have like the URLs or the information about the data sets, right? Because we don't want to host any images. We're also going to have a script that will actually download those images for the ML team for use when they're actually ready to start that training. So we've made some good progress on that this week. We have proof of concept all wrapped up there where we can pull from two of the more interesting data sets we've been looking at, which is Pixel Pros and just some common canvas one. We have that all set up with scripts pushing to Hugging Face and things like that. There's still a little more work we need to do there to kind of clean it up and have it fully ready. But like from our side, if we know where we need to, or when you're looking for the data, we can start pushing up this example data. And then if you tell us where you want to like run a script to like pull down the data, we can work with you to get that set up now. So
Perfect.
yeah, good spot now so far, I think.
And that is for the 256 by 256 images, the kind of
Yeah,
core
we have
concepts.
it. So we have it pre-processing. It's got. It's trying to do the appropriate ratios, not all just 256, but the 256 bins. So like some will be 128 by 512, others will be 256 by 256, etc. Tries to match the closest aspect ratio, but the same amount of data. So that was based on the conversation we had seen before in the machine learning channel. Um, so yeah, it's scaled down. We're pre-processing it to be scaled down already, and then we'll give you those scaled down ones.
Perfect. Um, from a captioning perspective, I know that it's just probably a little early because we're just trying to prove out the architecture right now. Um, but have we settled on what we're going to use for captioning, or has that been a point of conversation that we've started to have? I went through and tested Cog VLM2 yesterday. Uh, Very good as far as able to identify a bunch of objects in the image. I think the caption format is probably something that wouldn't be ideal from a prompting perspective, though. And I know that that's something that we've talked about is trying to balance that.
Yeah,
So
we haven't made any final decisions on anything there. What we have decided is we want to try and include three types of captions: a short caption, which will be, I might be wrong on the exact count right now, but 16 tokens or less, according to the Llama 2 tokenizer, which is used by the T5 Pile T5 XL. So sorry, short one, which is 16 tokens or less. Long annotation, which is 256 or less, I believe was what we've discussed, and then also a tag-based one where we can, which will be 75 tokens or less. So it may be multiple models to get those all eventually. I'm not sure on the details there yet, and I don't know if we need to like fine tune a captioner to get better
mm,
results or anything like that. There's been some discussions, but um, yeah, we wanted to include the three types because that'll allow for both, the short and sweet captions, the being very descriptive, and trying to have some things like relational positioning and things like that, and then also tagging just to kind of augment how some people may try and use the model, um, while still, not focusing on tagging for sure.
yeah, no, that sounds good. Um, I imagine that that will become more relevant as we get closer to actually building out the broader captioning data set. Are we is I guess thinking from a process perspective, when we go through and get that baseline captioning done, is the tool that the data working group team building, is that tool built for correcting those captions? Is that the intent of the tool? Maybe you all can give some context into like the general scope of the tool and what functions and features it's going to have, because I think it's definitely gotten a lot more ambitious as the team has started to work on it. So maybe we can just kind of talk through what the tool's intended functions are.
So I could probably speak to that. So we have the annotations that are on each of the pieces of content uh, where they have a specific source. So we would likely maintain what the originally generated caption was from that model, but then add the ability to provide annotations on top of that.
Got it.
Um, yeah,
So then that would actually even provide a good data set for uh, retraining potentially a captioner with
exactly.
corrected stuff. Okay, that's great. Great. Um, cool. Well, I think that gives us a good update on the data set for the initial kind of architecture testing. Just as a reminder for everyone, we're still aligned on a DIT architecture. We the testing will largely be around experimenting with control nets being baked into the base model training. So effectively doing something similar to like a control net union, but doing that during the pre-train so that the model actually has control baked in from the get-go. The other piece of architectural exploration is adding layers between the text encoder and the diffusion model so that we can offer some amount of trainability and incorporation of new image context and concepts. That's something that still needs to be tested, but I think what I've seen thus far with Flux, I think that might be a good architectural advancement, simply because I've heard secondhand from folks that it can be a little bit difficult, at least right now, to train new concepts into Flux using LoRa's. Um, I think the next item on the agenda that I had was really just we saw Flux come out a few weeks ago, and I'm just curious if anyone has uh, maybe seen, heard, or discussed anything that we can learn from Flux in building the architecture for the OMI model. It may still be too early for that, but and this is open for everyone in the audience as well. If you've seen or heard anything around Flux and things that it struggles with, or things that you think might help inform the model training that we're doing, certainly an open conversation. Anyone from this group? Okay. One, I'll just try to list off things that I've heard. I know that the model size has been um, commented on. Obviously, it is a very large model. I think the quantization methods have kind of proven out that you can have that model distributed in smaller form factors for people to use. Um, so that might be something that we should consider as well. And I know that we discussed this last time around the model size. The final model size is not settled, and it really can just be determined at the moment before we train it. Um, but ultimately, I think it is worthwhile to keep an eye on Flux and kind of things that we can take away from it. I know that the training of it has been, from what I can tell, very exploratory. Early testing is showing that it's memorizing content in some sense. Maybe a few folks can kind of comment on that. And I see people chatting here. Let me see if I can catch up on this. One thing I can say is that it seems quite obvious based on the results that they only used one caption style per image. I think that's my takeaway as well, is you almost have to use a narrative type prompt in order to get anything particularly good out of it. When training a LoRa, using between 3 and 5 different caption styles as a minimum is very effective per image. Could be interesting if you could expound on that concept. Someone shared an article that goes over the captioning nuance in Flux, so that might be a good article to read. See if I can post that out on the YouTube video when we do that. Somebody commenting on the quantization being possible in vision and not only for LLMs. Yeah, and I think that might be a ongoing discussion, is whether we push the size of the model up and just use quantization to make it accessible to folks. That means we can kind of have it at the high end, still kind of competitive with larger models, and then bring that back down using quantization. The last item that I had on the agenda for today was around the standards conversation. I don't know that this is going to be a particularly fruitful conversation with this group, primarily because the standards body that has been discussing that is largely not here right now. There's a few folks maybe that might be able to comment on things, but looking through, I don't think we've got Koya or Sergo or anyone else in that channel. If you're interested in keeping an eye on the standards conversation, there's an ongoing thread in the OMI initiative discussion channel. It is relatively long now at this point, but I think the big takeaways are that we have major players in the ecosystem all agreeing that standards are needed, and that once we settle on those, we'll work to adopt them. And that should be helpful for a lot of us in implementing new features, especially with Flux. We've seen probably I don't know, 10 different quantization formats, a number of different ways to train the LoRa's. It's kind of all over already. So standardizing that should help. Any comments from anyone on the call for standards, or anything that y'all want to bring up or discuss around that?
I was just gonna say I like standards,
Yeah.
but otherwise no.
Yeah, I think standards will be good. Standards will be very, very good. Uh, Still work to do there, but if we can get those going, it will be very helpful. I think for most people building in the ecosystem. I think everyone has probably struggled quite a bit over the past few years with the lack of standards and just the general kind of chaotic wild west of model formats. So hopefully that standardization will help. Um, I guess
I,
one. Good.
I had one more unrelated question, if
Sure.
it's a good time for it.
Yeah.
So, not sure if this is a valuable idea, but I know we have like the community has a forum channel where they can put in data sets, for example. I was wondering if we'd want to do a similar thing, but for collecting like good test prompts of like things that we would want to eventually, try our model with kind of thing. And the community could provide comparisons to like Flux or that kind of thing, right? And be like, oh, this is a tricky prompt. Here's how Flux does. Here's how SD3 does or whatever. And then eventually, we could go through and go, let's try the top 1,000 interesting prompts with our model as it gets developed. So um, we can show off the results kind of thing. I was just wondering if that was a nice community involvement aspect. We could
I think
create
it
like
could
testing
be good.
prompts.
I think we probably just need to get some guidance on that forum if we put that together of like what we would be looking for. So if people are, I you know, I can imagine the prompting going wild and getting crazy and not being useful. So it's more of
Yeah.
like I think just trying to figure out how we provide enough guidance that people know exactly what we're looking for. But I think it's a good idea. I can add a forum channel for it. Um, Call it test prompts, and um, yeah, we can figure out how exactly we want to give guidance there. You should be able to make some changes to that channel, um, but maybe that is a good idea for us. Like we could either do a post for different styles of prompts. So if we want like photographic prompts and concept art prompts and different types of styles, we could do a thread for each, or people can just kind of like chuck in a new thread for every prompt. I guess we can put some thought to that after this, but I think it gives people something to play around with. Would the ask be for them to test it across Flux, SD, XL, and then obviously could compare that with the OMI model? Is that the thinking?
That's kind of my thinking. Yeah, eventually, you want to have comparisons, whether even if we don't win in every category or whatever, it's nice to show, you know, what it looks like. So, um, I'm not sure which models exactly, if it's just Flux and SD3 or something else, but yeah, that was the general thinking.
Okay, cool. Um, no, that sounds great. One point of conversation, I guess I'll bring up data set composition. I know previously we had announced the data set would exclude children as a concept. I think after some discussion with uh, advisors and kind of people who are relatively deep in the space, there's been some suggestions made that we should maybe not do that and really focus on making the best model we can. Now, I don't know if there are people on the call who want to give thoughts there. I know that there are definitely some hypothetical benefits and hopes that we would have had by excluding that concept, that we would avoid some bad actors using the model for certain use cases. I think the suggestion or the concern was primarily that by excluding that wide of a concept, it might be ultimately deleterious to the quality of the model. Obviously, I think we can't really know that until we test it, but um, it could be very expensive to test that and have something that doesn't work. Um, So I don't know if anyone has thoughts on that in this channel.
I assume even if we excluded the concept of children entirely, someone could train it in afterwards. So if it significantly harms the model, I can see, as long as we, make sure that and NSFW never overlap in
Right.
our training set, then, because we don't want to encourage that obviously or anything, I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I think that would
Originally,
be
I think,
the implication there, is we would definitely have to filter out for anything that was particularly explicit.
yeah, I think the original discussion with the data team before the no children entirely came up was we would want some sort of scanner that identifies, is there a child in this image? Is there NSFW in this image? Is there violence in this image? And then children would never be with violence or NSFW, was the original idea, just to try and keep those concepts separate. But I don't know if
Yeah,
there's more
I think
considerations to be had there, but
yeah, I think based on the research, it is not enough to keep children and NSFW out of the same image. Simply being in the model together can result in concept combination effectively. So I think
yeah.
the implication there is just making sure that, like, if we're going to include the concept of children in the model, we are going to have to, uh, I would say, maybe focus a lot more on NSFW threshold and making sure that we don't have anything explicit. I think basically, like, nudity is something that has been, when we discuss with Thorn, and Thorn, just for context for everybody, is the child safety organization that is doing a lot of work in this space and looking at AI and how we can prevent harms with that. When I had a conversation with them, they basically said nudity is fine. It's really the more explicit NSFW content that is an issue. And so if we do choose to include children in the model, I think we have to be much more rigorous around the NSFW piece.
I still
But
wonder though, like, sorry, Kent.
you're good.
Safdol mentioned this, and this I think was our original plan, or at least our original conversation was that we were going to do one model with kids and nothing explicit, and then one model with explicit and no kids. And I still kind of feel like, that's a thing we should consider. I think that it's true, you can, post train through LoRa's or fine tuning pretty much any concepts into these things, but I'm just wondering, like, I don't know that a lot of people are going to like, for a layperson or new creators, the conversation of being like, well, it needs to have kids and nudity to be a good model. I don't know how well that holds up. Um, so I kind of want to just like continue that, have that conversation be in the space that, we might have two models or two inference heads. There's a lot of stuff that LLMs are doing that have like ethical AI frameworks to prevent certain generations, and there still might be some things we can do in those kinds of directions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a conversation we should continue to evaluate. I I think more than anything, if we can provide quality and competitive tools to the people who are using these things to create, I think that's our main goal. Keeping kind of the open ecosystem being pushed forward. Um, Ultimately, at the end of the day, I I think we're all in this to try to make uh, a good model. And so the only issue that I would raise with two models is primarily just the cost and the compute required to do two entirely different models. I think from a data set perspective, we can certainly prepare the data set in such a way that you could just easily, um, flip the switch and say what mode you're trying to train. I think we still have to figure out how we would get compute for that, and that's something that we're still working on at this point.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's important to identify it in the data set. But the other thing
yes,
with that is even if we identified it, made two different models, someone can use our data set to make a combined model. So that's the thing with building publicly, right? But I think it's, there's only so much you can do too.
Yeah. But what we can do, we shall do.
For sure.
Okay. I think it's a good conversation. I imagine that will be a continued discussion point, but it sounds like from a data preparation standpoint, as we are pulling that data together, we should be working to flag those concepts so that we can effectively segment and organize that content during training and effectively pull out anything that might otherwise be or that we don't want to include in it.
Yeah, so we actually have first level flags for NSFW, children, and violence that are all kind of first order flags on them.
Perfect. Are there any other flags that we should be thinking about? I don't have any that come to mind. I'm just raising the question as a thought starter. Is there any?
My only question is, obviously we're going to try our best to avoid it, you were saying, but do we need like more nuance to the NSFW flags? Because it's like nudity, good or okay, you said, right? Is it
Yeah,
just I guess if we're just trying to remove it entirely, we don't need like more detailed NSFW. I don't know. That's just what came to mind for me.
yeah. I mean, I guess that's like a good question. Is should there be some amount of like qualification there and segmentation? Because I do think that there is a pretty thick line between just nudity and something that is really explicit. So we might want to delineate that and break that out, um, just for the purposes of providing a better data set, because I think it is maybe overly generalized as just a single category. Um, so that might be something to dig into and think about how we would do that.
The other thing, I don't know if someone else on the data team already knows this. I don't know if we know what like the best models and methods and things are for ensuring we get those categories as accurate as possible. If it's enough to use a vision language model, or if there's
Yeah.
more techniques we should be implementing there.
Jeezy, we could definitely talk about this maybe this afternoon with Jimmy if he can make the data sync, because at Civitai we have a lot of moderation tools behind the scenes that we've built custom based off of synthetic data sets and stuff. So I think we can lend our tools to this to try and help identify these things.
Okay, that's great.
That is the going plan. Jimmy's been talking about.
Okay, sorry for I
No, it's
forgot about
great. I mean, it's good. It raises the conversation. I think this is the benefit of having uh, people like Civitai and the team there involved, as they've faced a lot of these problems, I'm sure, as we have. So it's good that we've got the tools to be able to apply to it. Okay. Let's see. I don't have anything else on the agenda that I'd pulled together. Is there anything else that anyone wants to bring up here for conversation or discussion? Okay. Then I think the next meeting will be 2 weeks from now. We'll do the same cadence every other week for the time being. Comfy said that he will have his new desktop sometime this week, and so he'll be able to put the training script together. We've put some asks for compute out to potential partners and providers. The general amount of compute that we're asking for right now is about 32 by 8 H100s. So it is not an insignificant amount of compute, but that is the ask that we have and are currently looking at sourcing. Once we have that, we will be able to do the full training runs. In advance of that, though, we'll be using a smaller amount of compute to do more of the training and kind of like architectural testing. So those two, I think, will probably go hand in hand after the training script is out and we've got the data set, as we'll start doing that. Architectural tests probably focus on the T5 and text encoder testing first, primarily because I think that's like a critical element for fine tunability. But the control testing I think will be really interesting as well. We may want to discuss which types of control images we want to do that test with. I think if we get too aggressive with the number of control images we're trying to use, it could kind of collapse. But I do think that there are a lot of different control inputs that we could consider using that would be useful. So I think for now that should be it for today. We'll go ahead and conclude the conversation unless anyone else has anything they want to talk about.
Did you want me to say anything about the VAE?
Oh, yes.
I know Comfy's not here, and this might be a conversation we want to have with Comfy on how big we want to, like, the latent space to be. Just how much compute can we afford to put towards this? Because we can go deeper. I've been running some tests on the HDR VAE and got compression ratios up over 32x. But it requires a lot more compute. So that's one of the things we'll have to like consider is if we want to spend a little bit more compute to get a smaller latent space, such that the model might be inference faster on smaller machines. And I'm also still working on moving over from Pro Photo color space to ACES, the Academy Color Encoding System, as well. So just a little update.
Now,
I
I know-
think as far as go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to ask you. I know at one point you had said that you were playing around with an idea of like a general HDR adapter instead of a VAE that you could use with anything, including Flux. Are you still mostly playing around with the VAE right now?
Yeah, so I did do some experiments with like an adapter. I do think overall it would be better if we used a VA for the model. Just due to some edge cases. So like one of the specific edge cases that I came across is like if you like, let's say you have a horror scene and there's a monster behind a dark doorway, you know? If the base model cannot generate the high enough contrast, whenever you feed it through the adapter pretty much has to come up with that extra detail. So I would say the better direction would probably just be a VAE. The adapter may still be useful for like other models and such, but to get the most use out of it, our model, we would want a VAE.
Got it. Now, I know that originally the plan had been a 16-channel VAE,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it sounded like you were exploring a larger one.
Yeah, so the results I shared originally, I think were either 32 or 64 channel. I have been working with a 16 channel recently, some of my more recent experiments, and I've been seeing about the same performance. It just takes a lot longer to train. Just because, you know, we're trying to condense it down to fewer values. And that's kind of the conversation we need to have with some of the other ML team. Determine, you know, how much compute do we want to allocate to the VA.
Okay. And you said you want Comfy's opinion on that?
Yeah, just I know he's going to be dealing with like the main training script for the actual diffusion model, but I don't want to take away too much compute. You know, we could go with something that doesn't compress spatially as much, but that ends up where you have a larger latent image that might be more difficult to run on smaller machines. But it converges a lot quicker, so you don't need as much compute to train it.
Yeah, that makes sense. There are some downsides though for having more channels, right?
Yeah, so it does. I don't know. From my experiments, I've always had faster convergence with more channels. I know there's been a lot of discussion whether more channels are better or not. More channels do allow for more details to be passed through. As like if you keep the same spatial size, if you add more channels, it's just more details passing through, but it is harder for the model to learn that and converge. So yeah, there's some trade-offs. We'll have to look at that. I have had a lot of success with the 16 channel, but the only thing is it takes a lot more compute than the larger one. So like the one I showed y'all in the ML working group, it was a 12x compression ratio between the normal image and then the latent image. Right now, the one I'm working on is about 48.
Awesome. I think that's a good conversation to keep having. My gut tells me that 16 is the right number, only because we've seen success with other 16 channel VAEs recently. But that may mostly be just risk aversion. So
yeah. I definitely see like a 16 channel working. Like the results are very promising. But the biggest factor is just how much compute will we be able to feed it. So
yeah, no, that makes sense. Thanks for the update on the VAE. I think that's going to be a good one to have. I imagine we're going to need that before we start the architectural testing. So we may want to get Comfy's opinion on that sooner rather than later. Okay. Barring anyone else having agenda items to discuss, I'll give kind of 5 seconds here for someone to make a peep. All right. Well, then we'll conclude. I've got it recorded. We will post it out once I figure out a channel. I think I might need to create an OMI YouTube channel. We'll post out the all hands recording. And we'll see everyone again in 2 weeks. Keep an eye on the Discord in the meantime for updates. Take care, everybody.